The other thing that I want to acknowledge is that when we planned this and promoted this, we had 2 different speakers, and today you will be hearing from people that are not those speakers. So this is just an example of life doesn't always adjust itself to our plans, but we have equally wonderful speakers joining us today on this important topic of community wealth building as an anti-displacement strategy. That said, the speakers that we had planned from Push Buffalo and from Fideicomiso de la Tierra are going to be joining us in we have a Mobilize group, and Mobilize is like an online platform in which you can communicate and share resources. We have one of those for the Urban Waters Learning Network that is dedicated just to equitable development. And they will be joining us in that Mobilize group. And I feel like we will be able to continue conversations with the broader network and with everyone that we want to hear from in there. So that being said, if you would like to be added to that Mobilize group, some of you, if you were here last time, you might have added your email and I can add you to that group. If you are interested in joining that Mobilize group, go ahead and drop your email in the chat box and I will go ahead and add you to that. One thing I should say about that is that it is the River Network's, it's a subgroup in the River Network's main online community. And so you would be added to both of those groups. Okay, so with all of that out of the way, I just want to welcome everybody to this peer call that we're hosting today on community wealth building as an anti-displacement strategy. And just a brief introduction to who is the Urban Waters Learning Network. A lot of you are familiar with who we are, and if you're not, I'm happy to introduce you. We are a team of 4. The Urban Waters Learning Network is co-coordinated by River Network and Groundwork USA and supported by the EPA Office of Water. Myself and Diana Toledo, who are here on this call today, Diana's helping and she'll be sharing lots of things in the chat, are from the River Network side. Anu Nochur and Maria Brodin, who I think might be on the call as well, are from the Groundwork USA side. And then our network members are represented on this map. It's one of the most recent ones, and we have a group of nonprofits, learning institutions, federal agencies, city, county, state, and tribal, as well as businesses across the United States, as well as the 20 designated Urban Waters Federal Partnership locations. So we're Urban Waters, right? Why are we here today talking about community wealth and anti-displacement? Just like to say up front that we like to take a holistic approach to the resources that we provide for our network. We've listened to our network through the years, and that's what's led us here today. So we understand the concept of Kimberly Crenshaw's term intersectionality as it applies to this work. And there's an article, a recent article from Charles Lee that we can share in the chat from the Environmental Law Review that lays out, successful environmental justice works requires multi-sector agencies and everyone at the table, including community, to do this work with the community. So that's who we are as the Urban Waters Learning Network. Over the last year, we have developed an equitable development collaborative. And this is where 4 leaders from our network, Alicia Smith from the Junction Coalition, Daniel Wiley from Ironbound Community Corporation, which one of his colleagues was just announced to be an advisor on environmental justice for I forget the office that it is, but it's for the White House. The Passaic River Urban Waters Federal Partnership Ambassador, Liz Valladares, who is also on this call here with us today, and Arthur Johnson from the Lower Ninth Ward Center for Sustainable Engagement and Development. So together we formed a circle. We met over the last year and talked about the issue of gentrification and displacement as related to environmental work. And we've used the model of the Circle Way to have these discussions so that we are using shared leadership and intentional conversations. So here we are today, and we're extending our circle outward and having these conversations here in these kinds of peer calls. So first, I want to go through our agreements and practices. We've been using things like listening with attention, curiosity, compassion, without judgment, speaking with intention, and also considering your impact when you speak. Those two things can be out of alignment sometimes. Even if we're well-intentioned, we might have a negative impact. Others, let's see, practicing the pause. This is something that I like to do is when we hear something that's really impactful or meaningful, just taking a moment, maybe taking a breath and recognizing that it was something that was really important and important to the group. Let's see. So these are the practices that we will use today during our discussion, and we invite you to be a part of this discussion. You can share your questions in the chat. And during the discussion portion of this call, if you wanted to raise your hand and actually speak, we invite you to do that as well. And so welcome to our group. The other thing that I want to acknowledge here is I am calling in from Asheville, North Carolina, living, working, and recreating on the lands belonging to the Eastern Band of the Cherokee. Acknowledging the original inhabitants of this, the Turtle Island, is a simple way to respect Indigenous history. And we have some links of why land acknowledgements are important and how it's just a simple way to respect this history. I also think that it's really important to recognize as we prepare to discuss this concept of community wealth, that the Indigenous culture has viewed and still does view wealth in a very different way than we do today. And so that's one of the questions I want you to consider as we have this discussion is, what does community wealth mean to you? And you can share that in the chat as we go along as well. One last thing, and I'm almost done. I wanted to acknowledge the ongoing trial of Officer Chauvin today for the killing of George Floyd last summer. I recognize the traumas, individual and collective, that are heightened this week, especially as we watch and wait for the outcome. And I recognize the different lived experiences of each member of our group today and honor how that lived experience brings a different lens to this trial as it's being watched. So I really, truly wish you all well, and please remember to take care. I will lead us into our poll question, and then I'll hand it over to our moderators for today. So Deanna is gonna pull up a poll. We just wanna get a feel for kind of what brings you here today. To what extent is your community experiencing displacement pressures due to gentrification? You know, there's the spectrum of not at all, maybe a little bit, or we're seeing it on the horizon, or a significant amount of you are seeing this.
Hopefully everybody's seeing the questions on their screen. Go ahead and submit. We've had about half of folks responding, so I'll just give it a minute. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close it in 3, 2, 1. Go ahead and close the poll.
Okay. So this is a little different. The last time we had this call, we had more people say that a significant amount of residents and local businesses have already left. But this time there's only 14% that are saying that. 57%, so over half of you, a small number of residents and local businesses are getting pushed out. 29%, it's in the horizon. We anticipate increasing displacement pressures in 2 to 5 years. 0%, not at all. And so this reinforces why we're here today and talking about this important discussion. So our moderators, I will give you an introduction of each of them, and then I'm going to hand it over to them. Won't hear much from me for the rest of the time. Arthur was born in the nation's capital, but his roots are in New Orleans and date back to visits with his grandmother who lived in the lower Ninth Ward. He grew up in Washington, D.C. and earned undergraduate and graduate degrees from the George Washington University and the University of District of Columbia. He relocated to New Orleans in 1999, where he has established himself as an accomplished fundraising professional and nonprofit leader with a number of educational institutions and nonprofit organizations. As CSED's Chief Executive Officer, he is responsible for the day-to-day operations of organization and works closely with staff and volunteers to advance CSED's key initiatives focused on food security, the natural environment, and the built environment. Alicia Smith is a community servant and Associate Policy Director for Freshwater Future. She is a proud mother of 3 and a proud native of Detroit, Michigan. She and her family currently reside in Toledo, Ohio. Alicia is also the community liaison for the Junction Coalition in Toledo, Ohio. She lives, works, and enjoys the Junction community's natural social environment with neighbors, friends, family, and visitors. Alicia's passion flows from her belief that all citizens need information to thrive. As such, she works to build the capacity of each family. She believes that justice work is not limited to the environment, but touches on issues of social and economic justice with the goal of promoting peace, public health, and a better quality of life for all citizens. So thank you so much for being with us, and I will hand it over to Arthur and Alicia.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Arthur Johnson and Alicia. I think you're framing the discussion.
Yes, good morning, and good afternoon, and good evening. As we have folks from all over the nation, we want to make sure we're appropriate. It's so important for us to begin to think about what is equitable development. What is equity first? What is that? What is equity? And we know that we can turn to a number of definitions, but we have seen within our nation, within this history, in our nation's history, and even in last year, all of the different areas of harm that it comes to when it comes to developing communities. And what does community wealth building mean to you? And I'd like for you to just take some time and enter in the chat box, just what is equity and equitable development? And what does community wealth building mean to you? This would be something great for us to fall back on thereafter. You can share your questions and experience in the chat. What would you like to get out of this call? And what are specific ways that you are already working on equitable development and community wealth building? Just yesterday, we had a great conversation amongst our leaders, our legislators. And when they begin to put together some of these stimulus and things like that, all the money coming down the pike for infrastructure, the funds coming down the pike for stimulus packages, how is that impacting our communities? What does that development for communities look like? So please share with us your thoughts. What is equitable development, and what does community wealth building mean to you in the chat? Move on, please.
Okay, great. So this afternoon, we're going to hear from 2 dynamic speakers, Janet Hales and Katie Bond Hancock. And I'm going to let Janet, she's going to introduce herself on that point, but to give you some information about Katie. Katie Bond Hancock is an accomplished leader in public administration and community development. Katie is a lifelong resident of Toledo, Ohio, and has worked in the public sector for over 20 years. She is currently the Senior Vice President of Operations and Community Development at Lucas Metropolitan Housing, with responsibility and oversight of the authority's high-level operations and nonprofit affiliates. Katie studied business management with emphasis on accounting and marketing at Ohio Northern University, proceeded to work in the banking industry where she became a leader in consumer and mortgage lending. Katie has developed a strong passion for and has devoted her career to improving the quality of life for individuals and families. By working to transform neighborhoods through collaboration and design of community development programs and services, Katie has extensive knowledge of several federal and state programs that have been used to leverage resources for the Toledo community. So I hope that you welcome both of these dynamic speakers. And we're going to start with Janet Hales is our first speaker, and then move on to Katie Bond Hancock. Janet.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you for inviting me. I am going to share my screen, and I have far more slides than I probably should, but there's a lot of really good information I want to share. So bear with me, and then hopefully we'll have time for questions. I'm excited about this area. I am the Executive Director of Advocates for Basic Legal Equality. I'll go ahead and share my screen, the PowerPoint. Can you see it? Okay, great. So I am the Executive Director of Advocates for Basic Legal Equality. We are a nonprofit poverty law firm. We are also known as legal aid to some people. You may know of legal aids throughout the country. We though focus on policy advocacy and poverty law, which is any kind of law involving people who are in communities living in poverty, civil rights, immigrant and agricultural worker rights. The people in this picture are attorneys, outreach workers, and paralegals who were leaving really the day after. I don't know if anyone heard about the Corso worker raids, where they rounded up a lot of people in ICE raids. Ohio was kind of a hot spot for that for a while. They were leaving to go to Michigan and work with people who had been rounded up. But we've got tons of other attorneys working right in Toledo and in neighborhoods. One of them is on, her name is Reem. And so I will also say, Reem and Alicia, if either of you have anything to add as we go through this, please go ahead, okay? We can make it a group presentation. We also have had a long time presence in the Toledo and Dayton communities and community economic development. And community lawyering is on there, not because it's an area of law, but because it is what we are very, very focused on, because it leads to equitable results. When we listen to people, people know what they need, and we can bring power to them through the law. And you'll see that theme throughout with our discussion here. All right. I wanted to start with some historical perspective. The displacement that comes with gentrification is no accident. It's not just, hey, things are starting to develop, people are just accidentally getting pushed out. It has to do with the whole history of segregation and the intentional segregation that happened in all parts of our country. And I have this quote, and I will share this PowerPoint. I'm not going to read the quote, but what's important here is that it does tend to be a myth that, that we have segregated areas because of white flight, because of a few bad actors in the real estate market, just a few things that happened, and pretty soon segregation happened. Instead, and I recommend this book, Color of Law. It wasn't an accident. I'm going to show you some maps of Toledo and focus in on Alicia's neighborhood, the Junction neighborhood, because it shows the very intentional nature and the government policies that cause segregation. For those of you who already know this, I hope that I'll make it more interesting because it is sort of focused in. It's not just conceptual. This is a 1938 map of Toledo. This was the beginning of, as you see, it's color coded, and I'm going to show you what the codes mean. And then I'm going to show you some overlays with current banking investments in the neighborhoods and see exactly how this played out. I will also share with you that these maps and this information was shared with people in the affected neighborhood and what a difference it made and the power it helped build in the neighborhood. So these are called residential security maps, and they have a color-coded legend. Type A is, you'll see suburbs, affluent areas. Type B is the quote desire. They're still desirable, and you'll see that they're not as desirable as A. C are older neighborhoods, homes that were considered declining. That's the word that they used. And D, of course, were considered the riskiest areas where, and you can see right on the pages describing each area, there's no lending. They were, banks were actually told not to lend in those areas. This is kind of drilling down on some of the descriptors of the different areas. The grade A were known as hotspots. In nearly all incidents, they're well planned, they're they're near amenities, and was very clear that good lenders were willing to lend there. They had better ratios, and they actually used the word, they were homogeneous, those neighborhoods. Grade B was what people who can afford are buying. Neighborhoods where good mortgage lenders will have a tendency to hold loan commitments 10 to 15% under the ratios, under the limits. Grade C, those were areas that were characterized by age, obsolescence, change of style, insufficient. And then these are things that, this is so interesting. Remember, this is 1938, but we're talking about these things right now. Insufficient utilities, inadequate transportation, then infiltration of low-grade population. These are the words that were used on these, on these charts that were put together by the trust company, and incorporated right into government policy. Good mortgage lenders are more conservative there. So that's where lending is starting to be restricted. In D, you'll see that some mortgage lenders may refuse to make loans, and others will lend only on a very conservative basis, which means that they will not lend a lot of money. As you'll see here too, and I hope some of this isn't offensive, but this is language right out of these. And there's those neighborhoods in which things that are now taking place in the C neighborhoods have already happened, including detrimental influences in a pronounced degree, undesirable population or an infiltration of it, which you'll see it gets directly into immigrant populations and race. And sometimes religion. Unstable incomes of the people and difficult collections are prevalent. Areas broader than so-called slum districts. So there's not, and this is a description. This is one of the area descriptions. The document that this comes from is actually 70 pages, and it goes through every single neighborhood in Toledo. And these documents were put together by the federal government throughout the country. And now you have a link in the PowerPoint where you can go and you can look at your area and see how different neighborhoods were described at that time. As you see here, this is the Junction neighborhood, and it talks about 90% of the land is improved. It's experiencing, as you see, trend of desirability in the next 10 to 15 years downward. There is detrimental influences, including encroachment of commercial and industrial. That gets into some of the environmental issues. Traffic noise. Then as you look further down, you see the inhabitants. Foreign-born families, 20%. They have infiltration of, they use the word Negro. Relief families, back then, that's what we would call, public benefits now, rather heavy. And then going a little bit further, there are clarifying remarks, and it says the area is 45 industrial and commercial. The trend is downward. This is something that is important. Dorr Street, which runs, right into downtown Toledo, was 100% commercial. That changed a lot when disinvestment came. Now we're fighting for every store. It's actually, there's more development, but there was a period where there was zero commercial for a while. It was all because of the lack of lending. Stores couldn't improve, they couldn't stay open. This involves Polish district and an old middle-class residential. Then see here, it says Negro encroachment is threatening on the east side of the area. So they're just out with it. This policy, and actually this document, was put together by the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which was created by the FDR administration. And it was to increase lending in suburbs and in white areas, and to limit or completely eliminate lending in mainly Black areas, or changing like the C and D grades that were given. Redlining maps like this one in Toledo were used throughout the US all the way till 1977. And the practices became habits and practices and continued on. I mean, there are redlining cases today. And so this is, it's actually at richmond.edu, the site is there, and I'll share this PowerPoint, but you can go to almost any area of the country to find, you know, how the maps played out in your neighborhood. So as you see, the redlining was intentional. It wasn't an accident or a few bad actors. So what did we do when we started seeing segregation in the US? The Civil Rights Act of 1968 made it illegal. There were further developments of the Fair Housing Act as time went on. Redlining, it was prohibited in real estate, insurance, and banking, and anywhere, and any other area for that matter, that you could connect to affecting housing. And just, I didn't really introduce myself in the sense of I'm now a nonprofit director, but I was a fair housing lawyer. So that's why when Alicia asked me to do this, I was pretty excited because this is my true love, because I think so much has to do with, leads back to our homes and where we can live. Some of the insurance redlining cases, just had to put this in here because this was one of the cases that I worked on, but it leads to another issue. We settled many insurance redlining cases. They were class actions. Nobody in the neighborhoods knew about them. We would have maybe 10 class plaintiffs. Did you know about them, Alicia? Did you know? You probably did.
I knew about them because remember, we had to work on the fact that they couldn't get federal funding because of not having insurance. So
that's
I began
right.
to
That's
do the
exactly
investigations
right.
for that.
Yep, that's right. But you were one of few people who actually even knew about the cases. They'd be in the paper. We would pay out money to people, but I was in charge of contacting plaintiffs, and there were thousands of people who would have been eligible, and they would say, I didn't know about this case. I didn't know that I had been redlined, you know, but it still did such harm because, as Alicia said, they could not get federal loans because they couldn't get insurance on the homes. You can't get a loan without the insurance. And so the redlining had a profound effect, but people didn't even know about it. And I'm going to get to why that's so important and why community lawyering is so important. So we settled these cases, pumped a lot of money into the Fair Housing Center, into some community projects, but for the most part, we enforced the Fair Housing Act, and we're really proud of it. How much change came out of it? Not so much. So we won't tell our fair housing friends that, right, Alicia? But it was historic, but it was not. It did not have an impact on the communities that we wanted to affect.
And I just wanted to give you a little cue, just another couple of minutes to cover your important stuff.
All right. So here's a new way of looking at things. Lawyering is still extremely important. Community lawyering is really what we've turned to now, and that is, and have been for several years. We build wealth and reinvestment by building capacity, by community-led advocacy, by community and neighborhood master plans and strategic plans. This is a quote when I was looking for some things by one of our lawyers who worked in the Junction neighborhood. By acknowledging that structures we operate in, including the legal system, are not only intended to help them, but actively built to hurt them, here's what can happen. We use these maps to show These are overlays of the maps I showed you earlier with lending in the very same neighborhood. And as you see, the patterns continued into 2017. Those lending, even though they were prohibited by law, even though we've had redlining cases, those lending practices continue to date. And so we looked at Fifth Third, Key Bank, and Huntington. All of those lending practices continue to date, even though the Fair Housing Act and the Civil Rights Act came into play in 1968, and the federal policies stopped in the 70s. They continued to date. Here's how we can use the Community Reinvestment Act and the acknowledgement of those intentional practices and neighborhoods realizing those intentional practices to make change. And it's the change that they have led. Once our attorneys worked in the neighborhood, in Alicia's neighborhood and with her coalition to identify what had happened, realize that it was intentional, not their fault. That's the thing that I think a lot of times things get internalized, that there must be something wrong. We don't, what's going on here? When the historical context is put in place, the legal issues are put in place, then we went to the banks and we filed Community Reinvestment Act papers with them on behalf of Junction Coalition that then helped connect the neighborhood to places of power, to banks, that then Alicia could form relationships with. She then had the Fifth Third president come from their corporate headquarters in Cincinnati and walk the neighborhood and see what their banking practices had done. And now they have a partnership that we're not even really involved in, that started with this Community Reinvestment Act legal advocacy, with us saying, you have a duty, here's why. And then it built power in the neighborhood and then Alicia could take the relationships to the next step. Some of the other things that we can do, litigation. We talk about wealth in terms of money. Wealth can be buildings. This was a church that had been sold off by the diocese that we filed for an injunction, and it now stands and is part of the community land bank. And it can be there for the use of the neighborhood to their wishes. I just put this other little clip in here. This goes back to the 1970s when communities have attorneys, they can do what they need to do. They can keep utilities in the neighborhood. Then we can get to things as simple as building wealth by things like driver's license reinstatement clinics. The first driver's license reinstatement clinic, we had over 400 people that tried to register. We couldn't, because so many people, because of over policing, have lost their licenses. This is something, it's remedial. It's not addressing it at the root of the cause, but it's something that people need right now. And we listened and provided these driver's license reinstatement clinics. I'm almost done. Here's a whole list of other things that involve policy changes, where if we listen to people and work with communities, we can help establish. And once we can help people, so we can talk a little bit more maybe, in the questions and answers. There are many, many policy things that can prevent displacement and prevent really what I would call as push out. And here's some resources at the end. I can leave this policy slide up if people want to talk about it. I am, conscious of the time. I could go into details about all of these, but maybe we can do more of that in the discussion.
We can always come back to it, because I'm sure folks want to know all about why in the world would you do anything around driver's license when you're talking about community development. It's holistic, because if you don't have a community that can actually access wealth, and they can't be part of the decision making, and they can't get to where they need to, because transportation is part of that. So thank you, Janet. Thank you so very much. Renee, is it okay for us to look at some of the questions in the box?
Yeah, we can look at the questions and answer a few of those. And Katie is also here and can speak whenever we're ready to transition.
Well, let's go ahead and transition to Katie, because I know that she's short with time as well. And so thankful that both Janet and Katie, the relationships that they have within community in development is so rich. So thank you. So why don't we honor Katie's presence, finish up, and then we'll be able to go to questions. Thank
There's
you,
some
Janet.
great questions. I'll be happy to answer. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Alicia. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm great. I'm
Good.
great. Good.
Did you prepare a slide? You want to go ahead and get started?
I did not prepare a slide. I was
Okay.
just going to talk.
Great.
But I just want to comment to Janet, that was a wonderful, I came in on the tail end of that, and a lot of the redlining and the insurance settlements, you know, I am familiar with, so that was good work. That was good work that was done in the past, but I don't want to belabor the conversation, because I know we're all short on time, and I'm going to go ahead and move into, you know, what I'm going to talk about, anti-displacement strategy in the context of some work that the Housing Authority is doing with our choice neighborhood initiatives, and that we had, I'm going to say that we were a little successful with when we developed or redeveloped or did some master planning on another project back in the probably early 2000s, and then moving on up to now. And so my name is Katie Bond, and I'm the Senior VP of Operations and Community Development for the Housing Authority. Just to tell you a little bit real quick about our Housing Authority, our vision is to be a premier partner in creating communities of choice in the greater Toledo area. Our mission is to create and maintain sustainable, affordable housing opportunities, provide pathways to a better quality of life, and empower vibrant communities. So we are a large housing authority. We're considered a large housing authority. We have two main housing programs, our low-income public housing program, and we manage over 2,600 apartments in Northwest Ohio, and we also administer over 4,500 housing choice vouchers. So we're one of the largest landlords in Northwest Ohio. We also, through our affiliates, manage two mixed finance communities, Parkwood Apartments, as well as Collingwood Green, which I'll talk a little bit about later, which is made up of new townhomes and senior high-rise built at the former site of Albertus Brown and Brand Whitlock, which was built in the 1940s. And that's that apartment complex that I was talking about a little bit earlier and talk about a little later. So in the context of anti-displacement strategy with the Choice Neighborhoods program, just to tell you what it is, first and foremost, the Choice Neighborhood Program is an initiative sponsored by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and it's their premier program and tool to revitalize communities that have distressed public housing, and then also to revitalize the public housing that is, or the neighborhoods surrounding that public housing. And in our particular case, we're talking about the Junction neighborhood, as well as our McClinton Nunn public housing development. So just to give you a little bit of context of location, Junction sits just west of I-75 in downtown Toledo. So the vision of the Choice Neighborhoods program is to become a neighborhood of choice. It's the benchmark of the program. It is to provide the residents who reside there the opportunity to have access to goods and services, and to again transform that distressed housing in the neighborhood, as well as the public housing, into good quality housing. And it uses that holistic approach that Alicia spoke about to community development, and it focuses on what we define as three pillars of the program: people, housing, and neighborhoods. So if you want to have great a neighborhood of choice. You want the people who live there, including the public housing residents, to have positive outcomes, especially outcomes related to their health, their safety, their employment, their mobility, transportation, education, the whole 9 yards. You also want them to have quality housing. You want the housing to be mixed income. You want that physical and financial viability of that housing, and that it's long-term. And then you want the neighborhood to be that's distressed. You want to transform that into a sustainable neighborhood. You want well-functioning services and high-quality schools and education programs and public assets, public transportation. You want all of that to be great. And I'm not telling you something that you all don't already know. And so the goal of this program is to create a transformation plan that redevelops the housing. And I use the term sustain the people and maintain the people and attract new people to that transformed neighborhood. And I feel like the program and those key 3 pillars of the program treats the causes of poverty, and it deals with the causes of poverty rather than just the symptoms of poverty. So, you know, it's their program, but it's for us to take and make it and improve it and make it what it should be. So we've had our challenges. Janet was talking about the redlining, the Junction neighborhood. It has evolved over time from heavy Irish to and Polish to 89% Black residents. The Black population grew in the Junction neighborhood during the Great Migration from 1900s through 1970s. But also during that time frame, there was a sense of pride in the 1950s of that neighborhood for many Blacks in the neighborhood, because it had a downtown thriving Black-owned business district. And so the point I'm trying to make, since then, you know, we have our challenges. This is not going to be perfect. We had urban renewal, redlining. There's been discriminatory practices, and so there's things that we have to, from a perception standpoint, that we have to overcome during this process. But the good news is that this program allows us to address all of those issues and concerns with the people, and under those 3 key pillars: people, housing, and neighborhoods. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the key strategy and component of the Choice Neighborhood Initiative, which involves intensive resident engagement. So and Alicia can tell you that as a part of the Choice Neighborhood Initiative, HUD mandates, they require you to have that intensive resident engagement, and we are going to do that, and we have done some of that. There's also protections and strategies involved in the framework of the initiative that requires no residents of the public housing to be displaced or for them to lose their housing. And every current resident in that housing has to be guaranteed a unit and have to be able to come back to that development. And then also the program allows for us, or provides, tenant protection vouchers. So residents are able to take those vouchers and go and live in other areas temporarily if they want to. They can go to higher opportunity neighborhoods, but we want them to come back, because what we're trying to do is create that viable neighborhood of choice. And those 3 key pillars allow us to provide that wealth building and create opportunity that will mitigate those who, those from not coming back to the neighborhood. I was asked the question, what do you envision a child growing up in the new neighborhood would want? And so, and these are some of the things that I think that we can do as a part of the strategy in this program, but we can create the safety of the neighborhood where the child has access to great education, including early childhood education, recreation opportunities, access to food, fresh fruits, vegetables, and excellent housing, not just quality housing, but excellent housing, and that their parents also have that access to employment, childcare, educational opportunities, wealth building, home ownership. And then at the end of the day, that child has a good foundation to build upon or start off with, having all those basic qualities of life comforts that, children in other neighborhoods and communities have and expect. And so this initiative, the Choice Neighborhood Initiative, has the framework that provides, if you will, a built-in anti-displacement strategy, and it has to be implemented with fidelity. And I think that we will do that. And I just will end by just talking a little bit about we developed or we demolished, and I mentioned the Albertus Brown and Brand Woodlock development. Those units were built in the 1940s, and they were demolished in 2011 in order to redevelop, housing that was more viable, for the neighborhood. But I think it wasn't, we weren't perfect, but I think we were able to provide those protections, the tenant protection vouchers. Some of the residents did come back. Again, I'll say it wasn't perfect, and it was a learning lesson for us that, one of the things that we have to do is, maybe be more proactive about when those families are leaving and we're providing those tenant protection vouchers, maybe providing some more support to services when they leave us and then come back. And we also have applied for a Housing Choice Voucher Mobility Demonstration grant that we hope, we'll get. And I think it provides those, I know it provides the funding for those support services so that individuals and family who are leaving the public housing due to us renovating or tearing down and reimagining of a specific site, that we're able to provide those support services so they can continue to be successful, but then allow them to be able to successfully come back as well. And so I think in the context of this program, I think it has built-in strategies that would allow us to successfully provide those wealth building opportunities and address those causes of poverty rather than just treating those symptoms. And then I think by doing that, that is a strategy that would allow the residents and the Clinton non-residents and Junction residents to stay in the neighborhood.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Katie. That's sure families are displaced. We have mobility of different race, social class, sex, family sizes. All of those things are going to change over time, but making sure that the residents, I heard you talk about resident engagement, that you have a very strict and strong engagement from the residents who have sustained those communities for years is so very important. We do have some questions in the chat box. We are going to end at 2:15. So we're going to definitely start our discussion now. So we had some questions to you, Janet. Community lawyering, what is that?
There are some different definitions of community lawyering. It can include, something as simple as any advocacy being community-led, but it really goes deeper to working with community organizers, with community to achieve social change. The biggest thing is, the biggest distinction from other types of lawyering is that the people, the groups that we're working with are the decision makers. Because, when lawyers, when we get a good idea and we think that something needs to change, typically in the past, we've said, this is a problem. And then we have found clients to, to represent in court, as opposed to people, going into the community, listening, seeing what's happening, and seeing what kind of solutions they want to see.
And I'll just
Alicia, if I could jump in.
Sure, Reem, thank you.
Hey, everyone. Sorry, I'm in between two meetings, hence my camera. So I just want to point out that community lawyering has humility at its core.
That's right.
Commitment to people.
Mm-hmm.
When lawyers come from a place of understanding that we don't have all the answers, and that the people most affected by an issue have the best answers to how they want to solve their issues, that's where we find a successful community lawyering.
That's right. Thank you, Reem.
Thank you,
Reem. Reem's a great community lawyer.
Reem's our community lawyer
That's
here
right.
in Toledo Junction. So thank you, Reem, for adding that.
Humility is a big word.
Yes. And just so that you know, as we wrote for the grant, Junction wrote with Able. It wasn't Able writing everything, taking the concepts and thinking. Junction residents sat with Aisha, who was our community organizer, and wrote what their needs were. Record expungement, housing, probate court understanding, all of those things, we were right there at the helm. Thank you so much for that question. And feel free to continue to enter in the chat box. The next question was, when we're talking about inclusionary zoning, Janet, can you talk a little bit more about how to be, the need to be careful with inclusionary zoning?
Well, in researching this, I just saw a couple of articles that said that you have to be careful about it. That inclusionary zoning sounds great, but if you're only talking about zoning, there's so much more to the picture. And sometimes if you're already at the zoning stage, it's too late to have much of a say. So the other thing is what some jurisdictions are finding is that inclusionary zoning can actually make it hard. It still doesn't protect from people being priced out. It doesn't necessarily hold down rents like rent control or extending affordable housing in low-income housing tax credit properties, extending the affordability requirement period, which is actually being considered right now. So it is not as, it can help with ensuring that there's mixed income, but it doesn't carve out truly, the amount of affordable housing that is actually needed to prevent displacement. That's the issue. It protects some housing, protects pricing on some housing, but it doesn't carve out enough to prevent displacement. That's really the summary of it. It's still something to look at as a tool, but you do have to be careful because sometimes you'll still end up having a lot of displacement.
And Janet, that lends itself to the next question. When we're talking about community master plans, talk a little bit about community master plans, and I am right here to help if there's a need, but can you talk more about specific ways in which community master plans can help build community wealth? What have you seen to be effective strategies that are advanced through those plans?
The example that I'm most familiar with is the fact that, excuse me, the Junction neighborhood worked on its master plan and had a very extensive master plan. And then from there identified the activities that needed to happen to make that happen. And some of those included getting lending. And then, so having the master plan enabled the neighborhood to jump on opportunities like community reinvestment activities. It wasn't, it was part of a master plan instead of something where people found out and, thought that they, would file comments with the bank for during their merger period. It was actually something where they said, we have identified this as an issue. Here's what we're going to do. And here's the route we're going to take. And it did end up in having more investment in the neighborhood and building wealth in the neighborhood. It actually resulted in some job training programs, some banking programs, some partnerships with the Habitat for Humanity. It had some very tangible results, and it all came from that master plan and identifying what community members wanted to see, where they wanted to see, the kind of growth they wanted to see and investments they wanted to see. Does that explain it?
That explains it. And I hope that Katie didn't just leave, because we have a full question for Katie. And if she did, I'm going to text her and say, come back, because we have one question for you.
I think she did, Alicia, I think she did leave, and she wrote a message to me that I think she meant to share with all of us, that she was thankful for coming in, but she had to get off, and to let her know if there were questions after she gets off, because she's interested in being involved in the conversation. She wanted to let everyone know that they're having many resident engagement meetings, focus group sessions, visioning sessions, and workshops with all residents that are key to the process. The feedback and input of the community will be a vital part of this process. So just wanted to make sure that everybody heard that comment from Katie.
Wonderful. And I just texted her, I said, if she can jump back on really quick. And I think that it's important, to Janet's point, and the question that we have for Katie. Diane, can we enter it into, for everyone to see? It was, what kind of coalitions do we need to pursue Choice Neighborhoods funding? And how can groups that are not squarely focused on equitable development, like groups focused on urban waters and environmental justice, be most impactful? Can you define inclusionary zoning, which Janet has already taken care of the inclusionary zoning, but for Katie, in regards to the HUD has a strict requirements. There she is. Thank you. So Diane, why don't you ask your question to Katie?
Yeah,
Thank
Katie,
you for coming back.
Yeah, thank you for coming back. We just yanked you right back in here. So Katie, I was just wondering, so many of the groups that we work with are not squarely focused on equitable development or affordable housing as their main mission. They are focused on urban water revitalization and just revitalizing the communities around urban waterways in general. And so, we're not going to be, our groups are not going to be the main advocates usually. So I'm wondering if you might speak at all about the kind of coalitions that communities that need to form in communities in order to get into these choice neighborhood programs. And what do you think might be the best role for conservation groups that are, include this in their area of interest, but this is not first and foremost to their mission? I hope that makes sense.
Well, I hate to sound very simplistic, but you're already really kind of doing that. And the reason why I say that is because you're connected with Alicia Smith in the Junction Coalition. So no, I'm not. So you have to find that grassroots organization that you can connect with, so that you both sides of the affordable housing as well as the water conservation, all of that can be meshed together. And I think what I think this is a model, so to speak, what you have right here with Alicia and the Junction Coalition. So I hope that answers your question, and I hope that didn't sound too simplistic, but I think that is really very important that you connect with those grassroots efforts that are going on in specific neighborhoods. Otherwise, you know, you can have all the ideas and thoughts in the world, but unless you bring the people along with you, it's going to be difficult. Like, we know that one of the things we've had numerous conversations about in the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative, and not just the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative, but just about a lot of almost everything we do, we have to involve the community and the residents. We have to have those partnerships, because partnerships are key. Grassroots organizations that you connect with the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative, we communicated, and actually we had in place, but we had over 35 letters of support and partnerships for our program. And it just, I think, you know, funders can see through if there's real connectivity there. And so they could see that we really had those relationships. So it's all about relationships. And if I answered that for you.
And Katie, if I can, just to help, relationships are everything. When you look at the fact that Junction and all grassroots organizations have pillars and staples that they're working on, but the grassroots organization has to be connected to partners like LMH, ABLE, Fair Housing. And so what we did was formed a housing committee that was attached to our beautification committee, our environment committee, our safety committee, our human development committee, with all of these partners. And Katie can tell you, there was over 100 partners. Yes. And we actually looked within our master plan and began to work with urban planners to say, this is what we want. And the first thing that held us up in the limelight was our environmental work, because our environmental work was interconnected, connected to our children's health, asthma, blood lead levels. Those things were directly impacting our livelihood. Then we started looking at the housing and how housing was connected to environment, because Junction has 4 pillars: social justice, economic justice, environmental justice, and peace. The peace comes from the trauma that many of the families go through in trying to access services. So that Community Development Act, or the Reinvestment Act funds, we ask, help right the wrong to which you have infused onto community. And then our partners, so we had people, then we had partners, like the partners you are talking to today. Then we all had to participate for one goal: the actual development of a community of choice, not a community of harm, because that's what we were living in. We had to restore and have conversations for reconciliation towards that common goal.
And just to add one more comment, not Alicia's community of choice, not Katie's community of choice, the community's community of choice.
Getting out of our comfort zone, knocking on doors. I have been told many times, little girl, if you don't get off my porch, you know, and you just smile and say, yes, ma'am, or yes, sir, because they've lived this pain. And we don't get to tell them, no, we're really changing it. We get to show them that we're going to change it. Now they're calling us, just from press releases and conversations, wanting to be engaged. And we're even working with the businesses in that space. So we all get to learn. Any other questions, Arthur?
Can I make one comment? As a community-based nonprofit in Louisiana and New Orleans, what we've done is we've had to kind of redesign not our mission, but how we approach our mission, and look at quality of life issues, that natural environment, built environment, economic development, health issues, health disparity, all that fits into quality of life. And that's what we have to start building. And we have to get more organizations, nonprofits that are in the community, community development is still part of natural environment, particularly when the watersheds like the Mississippi River goes right through your community, or other types of natural elements that make a difference. And we've seen that with health as it relates to how do we, with COVID-19, it's a natural, it comes through the environment of what we breathe, what we intake in, but that changes every aspect of our quality of life, from housing, jobs, education, recreation, on that basis.
When you get a chance, we've also included several links in the chat box. One of those links is a link to the Junction Neighborhood Master Plan. The HUD required that we had some master plans, some type that we can flip through. And Katie constantly would lift that master plan and say, the community did this. We paid for it ourselves. The community came together and all of us gave $100 and paid for the urban planners, the architects, everybody. We paid for it ourselves. Our partners came together. Katie's holding it up. And you can walk through it, and it talks about ABLE and our partnership and how we created social mobility through record expungement, community lawyering around tax foreclosures, probate. It talked about asthma. We have a whole asthma section showing how much our children were impacted by asthma, our families impacted by high blood pressure, the food desert in that space. So you will see that. You'll see the impact on education, because the school to prison pipeline and cognitive disabilities as it relates to the lead exposure in our community. It is all interconnected and woven together. You just have to be able to share the narrative and show that prospect of a concept of what you want to see.
I'll say one other quick thing in relation to all of that. It's not always easy for community to make the connections, as well as the nonprofits making the connections. We have to bring them in. Those of us who know it, who got it, we have to bring them in and explain to them why it's important to get these other organizations. I mean, equity, inclusion, civil rights, it's all part of the quality of life. And that's what we're really talking about. With housing or jobs or anything, education, it's still part of our quality of life. And without that, then our quality of life goes down and we're not able to grow.
And I'll say, after to that point, people are going to be hard on you as you do this work. Partners aren't going to believe everything you say, and participation is going to be low. But keep at it, and you will reach the goal of having an opportunity to change, be an agent of change. A lot of tears. People, think about it. In COVID, life didn't stop. Just last night at 4:30, I lost my uncle. While having to do all of this work, we're still having to move. We still have to live with a trial about George Floyd. So there has to be compassion at the table, that the people in the community know more than what we know. They've lived this harm. Take the time to do the listening sessions first. Janet knows we had listening session after listening session. And when I say folks weren't nice, and I had to put my tough skin on and my restorative justice love in and sit in those circles and hear them, now they are having opportunities to have change like nobody's business. They are families who are receiving $5,000 loans to get that are forgivable, to get their homes replaced and repaired. And we had to fight, but we learned how to hold hands and fight together, and to the point where there was no more fight. It was just us making solutions and how to come together.
Amen, Alicia. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Alicia. I'm just going to suggest that we pause and take a little breath there for a minute and just recognize how important that was. It is because we had so many changes, and I know that a lot of people are dealing with time, and it's Good Friday. We did decide to cut this session a little bit short today. And so if anybody's got anything else that they would like to add to this discussion, I would please invite you to do that. But really, I just want to express my deep gratitude for our moderators, for our collaborative, for all of you that are here in this discussion today. Thank you. I will share my screen for just another minute. If you would like to be added to our Equitable Development Mobilized group, please go ahead and drop your email address in the chat. And I think there will be an evaluation coming in the chat as well from Deanna. So take a couple of minutes to complete those. We plan to keep these conversations going. It's been my great honor to be with this collaborative over the last not quite year yet, but I've learned a lot and I'm listening. Thank you all so much.
All right. Thank you.
Bye. Thank
Bye-bye.
you all.
Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
all.
everyone.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful Easter holiday if you celebrate it.